Okay, so recording started. Great. So yesterday what we did was we looked at the Lotka-Volterra model, uh, which I said looks like this. And then we also figured out that the Lotka-Volterra model is based on a number of rather unrealistic, stupid assumptions. And these were those assumptions. And then the question was, how do you make it more realistic? Now, obviously, the simple way is to take each one of them and remove the reason for which it looks unrealistic. So one thing that we simply did was we took the Prey equation and made it density dependent. So basically added this part, and we saw that from oscillations, now the behavior comes down to monotonic damping to stable point. Then what we did was we also look at another model known as the Rosenzweig-McArthur model, which we didn't do the maths. We just said that this isocline over here, this Prey isocline over here, if you assume something known as Allais effect, then it's going to touch the x-axis at a point Prey population greater than 0, and obviously assuming some kind of a density dependence, it's going to touch the x-axis again at some point k. And then between these 2 points, this thing is going to have some kind of a shape, some kind of a hump. Okay, and then depending on where the prey population, the predator population's isocline cuts this on left hand side of the hump or the right hand side of the hump, you either get increasing oscillations of increasing magnitude or oscillations of decreasing magnitude. Obviously this is stable, this is unstable. Okay, so now what we are going to do is we are going to again look at the same Lotka-Volterra model, exactly the same assumptions, except that we are going to do it in a different framework. So when we did the Lotka-Volterra, we were essentially talking in terms of differential equations. We were talking in terms of rates. And we were assuming that somehow all the parameters that are there are averaged parameter over every individual in the prey population or the predator population. What happens if we don't take that method? What happens if we give each individual in the population, each prey, each predator, if we give it some properties, which is most probably drawn from some kind of a distribution, but with the distribution will have a mean and it will have a standard deviation around that mean, which means that each individual will have a slightly different value for that. And now we essentially allow these individuals to interact with each other based on certain rules that we create. Now, this kind of a modeling framework is known as individual-based modeling framework or agent-based modeling framework. Typically, the two are used interchangeably. If you really want to dig deep and become very, very pedantic, then in agent-based models, the interactions between individuals are a very important component. In individual-based models, each individual is being modeled separately, but it's not necessary that the interaction pairwise or triplet-wise or whatever, it's not necessary that the interaction between them is explicitly coded for. Okay, as I said, it's a very kind of sort of definition. You will find lots of ABMs which for all practical purposes are IBMs and vice versa. So in order to do this, we are going to use a certain platform called NetLogo. Now, one of the unfortunate things that your batch is undergoing is the absence of that practical Bio 221. So in that Bio 221 practical, Nilesh used to actually teach NetLogo, and he also used to make you guys do one particular numerical experiment using this particular platform. It's a free platform. It's incredibly powerful, and there are so many research papers which are used, which are using this particular platform. However, this has also been used a lot in various universities of the world for teaching agent-based simulations. Slight digression. Just 3-4 days back, there has been a fabulous paper on, you know, a large number of concepts that we are going to cover or have already covered in this particular course, all bringing them together within the framework of one NetLogo model. So I have actually asked the author's permission for sharing that model with you guys. That model is still not out there in the public, and the author has very generously sent me that model. Okay, so this is not the right time because some of those concepts are still not there. But once we are done with those concepts, for those of you who are interested, remind me on Zulip. I'll share this particular NetLogo model with you. Okay. So anyway, digression over. Back to predation. So this, when you open NetLogo, this is what the thing looks like. This is what the interface looks like. So the great thing about NetLogo is that, I mean, right, what you are seeing right now is blank. It's the equivalent of a new file. However, the strength of NetLogo for teaching is because it has a very large number of teaching models already incorporated, and you can find those models in this thing called models library. Okay, so I'm clicking on models library, and I don't know if you can read this or not, but on the left hand side, what you are seeing, these folders are actually subject areas. So it says art, biology, chemistry, physics, computer science, earth science, games, maths, networks, philosophy, psychology, social science, psychology again, psychology, system dynamics, and so on. Okay, so these are absolutely superb models, and then there are explicitly models written explicitly for addressing certain areas in the curriculum. And if you go inside each one of them, you will find that each one of them has many models inside each category. So what we are going to do is we are going to dive into biology, which actually happens to be the largest category if I'm not mistaken. And in biology, we are going to go to this thing called wolf-sheep predation. Okay, so all you have to do is to double click on it, and that will load the model. Okay, so once you load a model, then can you see 3 tabs over here? One says interface, the other says info, the other says code. Okay, so the beauty of NetLogo is that the entire code is right there in front of you, and this is very easy kind of a code. Logo, I mean, this is a variant of Logo. So if you as kids have played with Logo, then you should be very familiar with this stuff. And for this, what we need to do is to look at the info thing. Okay, so the info gives all information about what's the backdrop, how the model works, and so on and so forth. So as it says that there are 2 main variations to this model. In one variation, you just have the prey and the predator, the sheep and the wolf. And in the second one, you have the prey and the predator and the prey's food source, basically grass. Okay, so the first one is the sheep wolves model, the second one is the sheep wolves grass model. Now, in this, what is happening is that you have this interface. So assume that this is a 2-dimensional world, and on this 2-dimensional world, the wolves and the sheep, they are roaming around randomly. Okay, and in the process of roaming around, whenever they are encountering each other, then there is a possibility of a kill happening. Okay, and so whenever there is a kill happening, then the wolf is going to gain some energy. The number of sheep will obviously go down by 1, right? And to allow the population to continue, each wolf or sheep has a fixed probability of reproducing at each time step. And in this particular case, grass is supposed to be infinite, so the sheep always have enough stuff to eat. You don't care about their movement. Okay, however, the wolf doesn't have enough to eat, so each time step when the wolf is moving around, it is losing energy, and if the energy loss goes below a threshold, then it is going to die. Okay, so now if you think about it, this stuff is exactly what we modeled in the context of the Lotka-Volterra, right? Because here grass is assumed to be infinite in amount, and wolf and sheep reproduction is entirely based on how much grass is there. So if there is infinite grass, then for all practical purposes, that thing is R into H, the growth rate of sheep. The wolf, they have a constant probability of dying, which is essentially here modeled by the fact that if you go below a certain threshold of energy, you die. Okay, and then the sheep reproduction, the wolf reproduction is determined by, how much efficiency it has in terms of converting the sheep killed into its own biomass, and that thing over here is determined by this wolf reproduce parameter. Okay, so the way a NetLogo model is organized is very beautiful. So this is a two-dimensional version. There are also three-dimensional versions, but for the sake of the two-dimensional versions, the world is always a two-dimensional space, and you can have periodic boundary conditions, which basically means that any sheep which goes out from this side of the screen will enter from this side of the screen. Okay, so it's like a cylinder, on which they're moving around. Actually a toroid cylinder, and then also from the other side. Now, so in order to start the simulation, what you need to do, you need to press this button setup. Okay, so as soon as you do that, you see that these white ones are sheep, the black ones are wolves, and they have initiated with some initial number of sheep, which has been set over here, some initial number of wolves, which has been set over here. Okay, and now all you need to do is to press go. And when you do that, on the left hand side, you can see the sheep number and the wolf number being tracked. Okay, so if you look at it, the wolf number has already hit 0, and once the wolf number has hit 0, then essentially there is no control over the sheep. The sheep just, what they have said, the sheep have inherited the earth. Okay, so this is what happens in one go. Now suppose we want to check it one more time. We do it again, and you can see that there is some oscillation happening between the wolf and sheep, but the sheep number has gone to 0, and now basically the wolves are starving themselves to death, and there you go, the whole thing is empty. Okay, so okay, for the heck of it, we'll do it one more time, because there is something that I hope to be able to show you. No, it didn't happen. So anyway, the population has crashed again. So you can download this software, play with it, and satisfy yourself that in almost all the cases, not every single case, there will be a few cases where you'll get sustained oscillations, but in a vast majority of the case, the wolf and the sheep will not be able to coexist. Okay.
Sir, what parameters did you change across those three simulations you just done?
I did not change any parameters. I just took the default parameters and I did that. Okay, I can change all these parameters and nothing will happen. The thing will still happen. I mean, the dynamics will be exactly this.
So the source of stochasticity in the models is what exactly then?
The source of stochasticity is their interaction. Remember, this is
probabilistic.
Yes, exactly. So they are doing a random walk on this on this surface.
Yeah, okay.
But think about it. What we modeled during using the logistic model, the Lotka-Volterra model, was exactly this random walk. Okay, so this simulation, in some sense, is as close to adhering to all the assumptions of the Lotka-Volterra as it is possible. And yet, because we have ended up introducing noise, stochasticity, and actually one more thing, we have also ended up introducing finiteness in this whole system. Okay, because the number of wolf and sheep are finite over here. Because of those two things, that's it. Now the whole stuff is not going to show those oscillations, right? So just step back and think about what you saw. So we just did the gene-based simulation. So where did we start? We started with that lynx hare cycle, and we showed that there is nice oscillations between prey and predator populations, and there are other prey-predator populations which are undergoing those kind of oscillations. So population cycles is what we want our model to give. We make a model which is so bad, it's a caricature of reality. I mean, it's worse than that. All models are caricatures of reality. This one is, atrociously bad, and yet that goddamn thing ends up showing your population cycles. However, the moment you make the whole thing even a little bit more realistic, then cycles are gone. Okay, you aren't seeing cycles anymore. And when you do the same Lotka-Volterra model, but now essentially do it in a slightly different framework, and I told you what are the two factors that's different in that framework, bam, again there are no cycles. Okay, so what the
Do we
hell?
not see cycles even if we like make grass finite, or like add a value for grass and how fast it can grow and things like that?
Yes, absolutely. So you actually need to do exactly that. You actually need, that's why they have given the wolf sheep grass thingy. Okay, only when you give the grass that is from a bitrophic food chain, you make it a tritrophic food chain, only then you get the sustainable cycles. But the point I'm trying to make over here is that if you look at the Lotka-Volterra, whose every single assumption this model is sticking, that and this are not working out together. Okay, so okay, so obviously when your modeling is doing
Also,
something great.
hello, sir. I had a question. You ran the simulation for 2-3 times. For the first time, the sheep population went up to infinity, but the other 2 times the wolf population went to extinction. Why is it so? You did not change any parameters, right?
That is the whole point. So here what is happening is that you aren't going to get the same outcome every time. Okay, you are going to get one of two outcomes. One is, as you pointed out, all wolves dying out and therefore sheep going to infinity, or all sheep dying out, after which all wolves starving to death, 0-0.
So that means the N0 populations that are being fixed are completely random. The computer is itself taking in randomized values, is it?
No. The initial conditions are exactly the same, because if you look at it, okay, I don't know if you can see this. And you see that there is a slider saying initial number of sheep and initial number of wolves. That
Yes,
initial number is kept constant. I didn't change. I mean, if I wanted, I could have, but I didn't. Okay, so it's not an initial value problem. It's
sir,
a
what
problem
about the initial arrangement of these animals in that space?
that is random.
That is random.
That is random. Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, that thing and the fact that they are doing a random walk, which essentially means the interactions each time will be slightly different, that is enough for you to get two completely different dynamics. Okay. But the essential point is that the dynamics is one of them or one or both of them going extinct. You don't get coexistence, you don't get sustained oscillation. That's the main thing. Okay. So now what's going on? Can we now look at the system at a level which is not as complicated as nature, but at a level which is not as simplistic as a model either? So that obviously is the level of the lab. So again, one of the earliest experiments was done by that Russian microbiologist that I was talking about, J.F. Gause. And what he used was a species of Paramecium as prey. And just one sec. Point to the options. Yeah. So he used this Paramecium as prey, and he used another species as predators. Okay. Now, what he did was, in the first case, he introduced the Paramecium, He allowed their numbers to go up quite a bit, close to k, and then he introduced the predator. But the moment he introduced the predator, the number of prey started falling, and very soon all the prey became extinct. And then the number of predator, initially it increased, but when all prey went extinct, these guys also went extinct. Okay, so this was very much like our agent-based simulation, what we got. However, note one thing, that Gause is working in the 1930s. So he still doesn't know about agent-based simulations. So he is being driven by Lotka-Volterra models. And what he is seeing is that my model is doing something, my experiment is doing something else. And of course, nature is doing something else. Therefore, he said that, is there something that I can do to make oscillations happen? So what he did was, he took some glass wool. Okay, now what is glass wool? When in ICER they install the ACs, have you seen that over the AC ducts they put some kind of yellow material, yellow sponge looking material, and on top of that they put some kind of a silver coating. It's not a paint, it's more like a hard paper kind of a thing. Okay, so this stuff, that yellow stuff, is essentially an insulator, and that is what is known as glass wool. Nowadays they don't use it, but slightly older refrigerators, the insulation of the freezer also used to be through this glass wool. Now glass wool is essentially very small, thin threads of glass, and then the whole thing is woven like wool. That's the stuff. So if you ever see it, don't touch it, because it can break and get inside your skin and very hard to take it out. So what Gause did was, he took some of that glass wool, and that thing, since it's an insulator, you can imagine that it has pockets inside it. Okay, very small pockets. So he put that stuff inside the culture. Now when he did that, the paramecium, the prey, they were small in size. They were able to enter into those pockets. However, the predators, being larger in size, could not enter into the pocket. So what happened? So what happened was that as soon as he introduced the predators, all the guys, all the paramecium who were outside, they got eaten. That's why the paramecium number slightly fell. But after that, all the remaining paramecium, they just went and entered inside the glass wool. So the glass wool acted like what is known in ecology as a refugia, essentially a space where some organisms, typically the predator, or it might even be a parasite, cannot enter. So when that happened, these predators, the Didinium, they ended up finding no prey. So they essentially starved and they went extinct. However, these guys, they were able to happily multiply inside the glass wool, and therefore their numbers skyrocketed. So again, this is like one of the outcomes of our NetLogo model, yet this is not, not exactly this. In this particular case, inevitably, these guys, the predator went extinct first, the predator went extinct first, and the prey went exponential after that. So Gause was a very determined man. So he kept on doing all kinds of experiments. And finally, the one experiment that was able to lead to sustained oscillations in prey and predator number was the one in which every third day he ended up adding one prey and one predator from outside. Okay, so this is the only thing which led to these kind of stable oscillations. Therefore, Gauss's main conclusion was that in these kind of systems, they will always drive themselves to extinction if you leave them on their own. And therefore, the kind of oscillations that you are seeing are possible, thing in nature, are possible if and only if you assume that it's not a closed system, it's an open system, there is constant migration from outside. And therefore, Gauss's solution to why we obtain those nice oscillations was that in nature, no population is a closed population, and therefore it's migration which is sustaining the whole thing. Now, this is not a very great solution in some sense, because in nature too, there are some populations which for all practical purposes can be thought of as closed populations. It's just a matter of the scale at which you look at it. So then, according to this, those guys should not be able to sustain themselves. So how is it working? So there were several experiments, several people worked on this problem. One major set of experiments was done by this American biologist called Hufeker, who was using two species of mites, one prey mite and another predatory mite. Okay, so this is called sex maculatus. This sex is not the sex you guys are thinking. This is the sex which means 6. So maculatus means spot. This is the same root from which you get immaculate, which means spotless. So sex maculatus literally means 6 spots. So this was the mite which had 6 spots on its body. So what he did was, he took an orange like this, and remember these are mites, very small. Okay, so he didn't want to have to count the entire orange. So what he did was, he ended up putting wax paper on much of the surface of the orange. Okay, so that's the wrinkly thing that you see over here. As a result, only a small portion of the orange was actually available to the mites. These guys are only there on the surface. And then he essentially tried to create different kinds of systems for these mites. So initially he tried with just one orange on which he put the prey and the predator, both. The same thing happened. The predator ate the prey and then went extinct itself. Then what he did was, he took 2 oranges and then connected them by some kind of a silk thread. When he did that, again it took longer, but after some time again the predator drove the prey to extinction. Then he made the system even more complicated. So in some cases, he, for example, took this kind of a system. Here, can you see 1, 2, 3, 4? These 4 light colored things, these are actually the oranges. So these are the ones which are surfaces where the mites can live. Everything else are plastic balls. So the oranges, so the mites can go there, but they cannot sustain themselves on it. So this way he created more and more complicated systems. And finally, I think when he moved to a system of some 48 balls or something like that, finally he was able to obtain this. Okay, so whatever you see over here, this is one of them is the predator. The black one is the predator. The open one is the prey. And you can see that if he had pretty complicated arrangement of patches, that's the only case he got these sustained oscillations. So Hufeker's interpretation was, so this is how the experiment proceeded. So here what you are seeing, these squares are essentially this entire surface that you are seeing over here. So each small square that you see inside it, that small square is telling you what is the mite abundance on that. So if you have dark green, that means lots of mites. If you have white, there is some amount of mite, and if there is nothing, that means there are no mites. And wherever you see the dots, those are the places where you end up finding the predators. Okay, so you can see that it goes up and down, and the spatial distribution, relative spatial distribution of the prey and the predator keep on altering, but finally you end up getting your blessed oscillations. So Hufeker's insights were that if you put a prey and a predator together, then until and unless the prey has some kind of an advantage, either in form of a refugia or in form of something, something that it can do which the predator can't do, the predator will always, over long enough time, drive the prey to extinction. Now this in some sense makes sense, because each time there is a prey-predator interaction, the predator at max loses a meal, and it has to lose a very large number of meals before it dies out of hunger. However, each collision, each encounter with a prey with a predator in some sense is enough for the prey to lose its life. So in some sense, the prey has more at stake compared to the predator. So he ended up showing that if you don't have the advantages directly, then one thing which can actually lead to the prey and the predator remaining together is a pretty complicated spatial arrangement, so that the prey can, in a metaphorical sense, be always one step or two steps ahead of the predator. If that doesn't happen, then the prey will always go to extinction. There is nothing else that can happen. Now, obvious. Bolo.
Sir, I have a question. If this is true, then how did the wolves end up dying in the first simulation we did?
Yeah, that is a simulation. What I'm talking about is his interpretation of the experimental data. Okay. See, in the wolf case, if you allow them to stay longer and longer without food, then you will end up getting some value, after which it will become close to impossible for the wolf to go extinct. So it's just a question of how long they can go hungry. Okay. And anyway, as I said, that's a simulation. This is his real life or empirical insight. So now the obvious question is, what exactly is happening in nature? Now in nature, whether they are driving them to extinction or not is a different ballgame. But typically predators are always reducing the population size of the prey. That's pretty much given. And because they are doing that, this ability is actually something that is of enormous economic advantage, because many a times an efficient predator will do it far better than the most efficient chemical that human beings can come up with. Okay. And because of that, it is nowadays, when you look at the process of pest management, people are more and more getting, well, I'll take that back. It's not nowadays, it's at least 2-3 decades now that people have understood that depending solely on chemicals for bringing down the number of your agricultural pests is a terribly, terribly bad idea. So actually, the amount of chemical that you should give in some sense should be just enough to supplement what the natural enemies are doing. In most of the cases, the natural enemies are actually far, far better in taking out the predators. So as I said, it's if you look at a large number of systems, you realize that it's a very, very complicated story. All kinds of dynamics you end up observing, and that is also happening because in the lab situation and those simple simulations that we did, we considered one prey, one predator. But in most of the natural cases, you have multiple preys, you have multiple predators. And the moment you introduce those complexities, the dimensionality of your system increases. And obviously, then you end up getting much richer dynamics, including those kind of complicated cycles. As I said, any natural population is going to have spatial heterogeneity. One major thing that is a problem with all these simulations is that we are assuming that the predator's efficiency is always a constant. However, in nature, we know that most predators, once they are satiated, which means once they have eaten enough, they will basically not want to kill anymore. Okay, most predators would do that, not everyone, but mostly they wouldn't want to do that. And finally, the most important thing that is happening is that, as somebody pointed out yesterday, in nature, evolution is happening. Okay, these guys, they are continuously changing in response to each other. So what we'll do is, I'll show you guys a quick video of the major evolutionary changes that happen. Okay, and I'll leave you guys with that. Just one second. So what I'm going to give you guys right now is in some sense a summary of what we are going to talk in the next class. Okay. So just give me 1 minute.
So you may remember that a predator is an animal that hunts and kills other animals for food.
You guys can hear this?
Conversely, prey is a term used to describe
Yes, sir, we
animals
can
that
hear
are
it.
hunted and killed
Yes.
by predators. Now, for the purposes of this lesson, when I talk about predators and prey, we can also think of herbivores as predators of plants and plants as prey of herbivores. The interactions between a predator and its prey, as well as the interactions between a herbivore and the plants it eats, are some of the most powerful driving forces behind evolution. Predation is a strong selective pressure which drives prey organisms to find ways to avoid being eaten. Prey organisms that are difficult to find, catch, or consume are the ones that will survive and reproduce. The result is that over evolutionary time, prey organisms have developed a stunning array of strategies to avoid being eaten. Some defensive strategies are pretty obvious, and top among the list of obvious strategies is running away. Gazelle, deer, small mammals, and lizards often rely on their speed and quickness to escape predators, and many birds rely on flight as their primary defensive strategy. Some organisms, like armadillos, tortoises, porcupines, and thorny plants, use armor, quills, and thorns to defend themselves against predators. One of the most widespread defensive strategies of animals is camouflage, or the ability of an organism to blend in with its surroundings. Camouflage can be as simple as being the predominant color of surrounding vegetation, or it can define an organism's complete morphology, like this walking stick. Some animals have such good camouflage that they literally disappear in their natural habitat. Can you find the camouflaged animal in this picture? Here it is. It's a leaf-tailed gecko that blends in with the bark of a tree. Camouflage is a great defensive strategy as evidenced by its widespread use in nature, but there is no rule that says it can only be used to hide from predators. In fact, many predators themselves use camouflage. Some predators, like this orchid mantis, go so far as to resemble the source of food that their prey uses. The coloration, shape, and even posture of the mantis resemble the flower it sits in, so not only does its prey not recognize the mantis as a threat, it's drawn to the predator, thinking it's a flower. Some organisms have resorted to chemical warfare to defend themselves against predators. The very distinctive smelling spray of the skunk comes to mind, and the bombardier beetle sprays would-be predators with a toxic chemical in a similar fashion. Some organisms are themselves poisonous, like this poison dart frog. Animals that use chemicals as a defense rarely use camouflage, quite the opposite in fact. These animals are usually brightly and distinctively colored to stand out. These markings are called warning coloration, and are bright or distinctive markings that serve as a warning to would-be predators. A very common and universally known warning coloration is the black and yellow stripes of many species of wasps, hornets, and bees. Some harmless species of flies and even some beetles have developed similar black and yellow coloration to mimic the potentially dangerous wasps and bees. This type of mimicry, where a harmless animal mimics a dangerous or unpalatable animal, is called Batesian mimicry. Many types of butterflies also practice Batesian mimicry. However, there are cases where two or more dangerous or unpalatable species all resemble one another. This type of mimicry is called Mullerian mimicry. The monarch butterfly, shown on the left, and the viceroy butterfly, shown on the right, will make animals sick or taste or eaten. When two unpalatable species resemble each other, they reinforce avoidance by predators by increasing the frequency of unfavorable encounters. The predators learn faster, and fewer butterflies of both species are eaten during the learning process. So far, we've focused mainly on defensive strategies used by prey, but predators can also use some of the strategies already mentioned to help them capture or kill their prey. Cheetahs use their speed to outrun their prey, and eagles, hawks, owls, and falcons use flight to their advantage while hunting. Venomous snakes, spiders, and wasps use poisons to either kill or immobilize their prey. Some predators even use mimicry to capture prey. The alligator snapping turtle uses its pink worm-like tongue as a lure to draw fish right into its mouth. The turtle will sit submerged underwater with its mouth wide open and flail its tongue around like a writhing worm. When an unsuspecting fish goes after the tongue, the turtle snaps its mouth shut and eats the fish instead. When it all comes down to it, predators and prey are in a constant battle to gain an advantage which will help them survive. Whenever a predator develops an advantage that helps them acquire prey, there is selective pressure on the prey to adapt and find a way to avoid this new method of predation. The organisms that most effectively adapt to and avoid predation will survive and reproduce. It works in the opposite direction too. When prey organisms develop an effective defense against predation, its predators must adapt to the change and find a way around the defense or find a new organism to prey on. Predators that don't adapt and can't capture prey will starve to death. The end result is that predators and prey evolve in response to interactions with each other. These tight evolutionary relationships can result in coevolution, which is when two species evolve in a coordinated fashion by adapting to changes in each other. A good example of coevolution occurring between a herbivore and a plant is the coevolution of the Heliconius butterfly and passionflower vines. Passionflower vines contain toxic compounds in their leaves that make them inedible to most herbivores. However, Heliconius larvae have evolved enzymes which break down the toxic compounds and allow them to eat the leaves of the vines. So Heliconius butterflies lay their bright yellow eggs on the passionflower leaves because they are a good food source for the larvae. But they won't lay eggs on leaves that already have bright yellow eggs on them because too many larvae in one place will result in not enough food for all of the larvae. So Heliconius females search for leaves that don't already have eggs on them. Amazingly, some species of passionflower vines have bright yellow structures on their leaves that look like Heliconius eggs. These structures deter the butterflies from laying their eggs there, and more than that, these structures are actually nectaries that provide food for ants and other predatory insects that eat Heliconius eggs and larvae. So the yellow structure defense is twofold. It deters the butterflies from laying the eggs, and it attracts predators of Heliconius larvae. These back and forth counter-adaptations are what cause coevolution between predators and prey. Okay, it's review time. A predator is an animal that hunts and kills other animals for food. Conversely, prey is a term used to describe animals that are hunted and killed by predators. The interactions between a predator...
Okay, I don't think you guys are sitting for an exam anyway, so I don't think you guys need the summary. Okay, so what I'll do is, we are almost done. What I'll do is I'll stop the recording, which means I'll dissolve the class, and then if anybody wants to hang around for asking some questions, feel free to do so. Ruchita, this is going into your Google Drive, okay?
Yes,